All right. Thank you all for joining today's call. We are thrilled to be able to host this call for all of our volunteers across Texas. I'm speaking to you today from the great city of Lubbock, and I'm honored to be kicking off our call. Today, you will be hearing from volunteer leaders from all across Texas and from many of the March of Dimes boards and committees that are all hard at work to ensure healthy moms and strong babies. I'm Greg Thompson. I'm the West Texas Board Chair and President for AmeriGroup Texas. The reason why I support the March of Dimes is that my wife and I had the joy of having a healthy baby girl about 9 years ago. A joy that I know that many Texas residents may not get to experience. And the March of Dimes is one, if not the only nonprofit organization that set out on a mission and achieved its goal, curing polio many years ago. And I'm excited for not only the groundwork that the March of Dimes is doing in the great state of Texas, but just as important, the global research initiatives we are supporting to keep every mom healthy and every baby strong. You see, I was a bench scientist at UT Southwestern a couple of careers ago. And so science and research is part of my background. And so I love the fact that the March of Dimes keeps research first and foremost in their mission. This call is an example of how the March of Dimes is moving forward in our work to be a conveyor and lead collaborator for moms and babies' health. We know that for us to improve the health of all families in Texas, we must work together as a state and within our cities to form stronger partnerships and coalitions. I don't need to tell you that this has been an absolutely crazy year. COVID-19 had an impact on all of us, on our businesses, our families, and of course, the organizations that we support like the March of Dimes. We thank you for giving us your time today and for your continued support of the March of Dimes. The March of Dimes has been busy this year, absolutely busy. And the agility is amazing. We would like to share a couple of the key highlights from 2020 that are only possible thanks to you. The March of Dimes, we have virtualized our programs like the NICU family support and supportive pregnancy care to ensure families had support and education in these vital times of COVID. It's a scary time, and the fact that we've pivoted is amazing. And we also implemented our award-winning News Moms Needs blog. That's hard to say. Try to say that 3 times in a row. And it provided vital information and was a trusted resource for moms and moms-to-be. Thanks to all of you and your support of the local market staff, here in Texas, on top of our existing work, we are also able to ensure, go on to the next slide, please, that over 3,000 meals were provided to healthcare partners and their families in the NICU. We distributed over 2,000 tablets with video calling capabilities and March of Dimes resources to NICU families in partner hospitals. Absolutely amazing work. We funded implicit bias training and other C&E courses for healthcare professionals. And we were able to launch 8 new supportive pregnancy care sites in 2021. I mean, that is a round of applause right there. Absolutely amazing work. Great job, March of Dimes. Moving on, we also launched a new series to ensure moms and moms-to-be had access to community leaders across the state. The It Starts With Mom series this past November highlighted authentic voices, expert advice, and valuable experience aimed to help make change happen and support families in their journey to parenthood in Texas. The inaugural series has already had over 25,000 views and available online as a continued resource for families. None of this would have been possible without your support. On behalf of all the volunteers on this call, thank you. However, we still have a lot of work to do. Texas, unfortunately, continues to lag behind national averages in premature birth, infant mortality, and maternal mortality. As we all learn to operate within the new realities of COVID-19, the March of Dimes will continue to fight for the health of moms and babies in Texas. This includes monitoring the impacts of COVID-19 on moms and babies, but also continuing to advance the initiatives and solutions needed to solve the maternal and infant health crisis that was here long before the pandemic. Now, next up, I would like to introduce to you Dr. David Lakey. He's a March of Dimes Board of Trustee member. He is also the Vice Chancellor for Health Affairs and the Chief Medical Officer at the University of Texas System. Dr. Lakey is going to review the 2020 March of Dimes, the Texas Report Card, and share some insights on our 2021 priorities and objectives. Thank you again for joining the call today. Dr. Lakey?
Thank you, Greg. And as I start, I want to let you know how much I appreciate all the work that you do in order to improve the lives of mothers and babies across the state of Texas. We're going to look at the data, and I think data is very sobering and it can steer us in the right path, but it takes people like you that are working on the front lines in your communities to really improve the lives of moms and babes, to ensure that the babies born in our state will be able to celebrate a happy first birthday with their moms there. And again, we need to do a lot of work in Texas in order to ensure that that will happen. A little bit about myself first as I start, just because I think it'll give you a perspective of my thoughts on the data. I am actually an infectious disease physician by training, but I had the privilege of serving as the Commissioner of Health for Texas for about 8 years. And about a couple years into my journey as commissioner, I was with other state health officers from around the nation, especially this part of the nation. And we started talking about the challenges that we had in our communities. And it became very evident in the southern states that all of us were suffering from the challenges of prematurity. And it became also very evident that we weren't doing as well as we needed to ensure that moms had the type of care that they needed so that they would be able to be there with their babies following the birth of the babies. So I came into the March of Dimes from that position as we were looking at trying to do things from a national perspective and learned about the great work the March of Dimes was doing. They came alongside us. They helped us provide the data. They helped us move some of these initiatives nationwide. And that wouldn't have happened if the March of Dimes wasn't working there side by side with us state health officers as we were trying to address this issue that we were facing. And so again, it's the work that you're doing on the front lines is incredibly important. Obviously, a lot of us are doing a lot of work right now with COVID. One of the lessons that I learned when I was the Commissioner of Health is that it's easy to take your eye off the ball of important health issues as you're taking care of these urgent health issues. We have this urgent health issues of COVID, but we can't fall behind any further related to what we're doing for babies and moms here in Texas as we're trying to address those issues. Because the story is that although people are doing a lot of great work, we still need to do better here in the state of Texas. This has been an interesting year for the March of Dimes. Again, I am privileged to be part of the trustees. I've been a trustee now for 5 years and a donor to the March of Dimes. We have adjusted, obviously, with everything that's gone on. It's been a challenging related to the budget, but the March of Dimes has adjusted in order to address those issues. And as Greg noted earlier, you have pivoted. We have pivoted on how we provide our services. We have pivoted on the fundraising. The ability of the March of Dimes to make those changes in the midst of a pandemic has really put us in a better place than many other not-for-profit and philanthropic organizations across the nation. Our mission still is incredibly important. We are funding research that I think will be groundbreaking as we understand the causes of prematurity. Funding the perinatal research centers across the nation and other research. We serve individuals. Greg noted, and that was impressive, Greg, the amount of developing additional services to serve families that are in the NICU, bringing meals to them, that support that's really hard if you've ever had a premature baby and trying to think through how you take care of this baby, to have an organization like the March of Dimes to come, surround you, and support you through that event. We have a mission related to education, which has actually increased over this time period, because with this new technology that we're becoming much more familiar with, we can have more virtual conferences and reach more physicians and nurses and educate them about the challenges that we're facing and how to address them. And then I think that, the role of advocacy has never been more prominent in the March of Dimes, to make sure that policies are put in place at the national level and at the state level to make sure moms and babies get the support they need. And we're pushing to make sure that we get the type of funding at the NIH and other places that will help drive this type of critical research, which sometimes goes neglected at the national level if it wasn't for the March of Dimes jumping in and trying to provide this type of support. So with that, let's go to the report card. And I want to give a little bit of a perspective as a former state health officer about these report cards, because I think it's really important. And this will look complicated, but I think it's actually, it's very simplistically logically shows those issues that we need to address if we want to make a difference. No state health officer wants to get a grade and be told that they're getting a D. A lot of state health officers, state agencies, states as all, we strive to do our best. But a D is not acceptable. A D is not a passing grade, but it is realistically where we are in the state of Texas. And so these report cards, state health officers across the nation get these report cards, and it shows us, and it shows the public where we are and whether we're moving forward or backward related to the care of babies and moms in our states. So in the next several slides, I'm going to go through the different parts of it, but wanted to show you the overall report card so you can see how it is shown to state health officers. And again, the general public, to everyone. If you look at the state of Texas, our rates were going down for prematurity up until about 2014, 2015. But for the last 4 years, our rates of prematurity have gone up. And right now, 11% of all the babies born in the state of Texas are premature. And again, that's not acceptable. At the best, we got into the C range, but again, we have fallen back and are in now the D range related to our prematurity rates. And again, you can see that here, the change that has occurred, and we're not on the right projection here in the state of Texas. Now, we do a little bit better than other states related to our infant mortality rate, and we'll show the comparison to other states in a minute. But our infant mortality rate right now is at 5.5 per thousand. So out of 1,000 babies that are born, 5 of them will die here in the state of Texas following their birth. Go to the next slide. One of the things that I learned when I was the Commissioner of Health was that averages are only so helpful, that if you really want to figure out health in the state of Texas, you have to delve into the data and look at the disparities that are here, either the geographic disparities or the ethnic disparities. And prematurity, and I would also say maternal morbidity and mortality, are one of those areas that shines a bright light on the disparities that occur here in the state of Texas. In Texas, the premature birth rate among Black women is 39% higher than the rate among other women. Again, our overall rate is not acceptable, and this significant disparity absolutely is not acceptable, and is an area that we are focused on in the March of Dimes at the national level to figure out how do we address this. It also is important, as I noted, not only look at ethnic disparities, but the geographic disparities. And one of the ways we do that is look at county by county data. And I'll let you just look at this data for a second, but you can see the range of prematurity rates. At Travis County, Austin always seems to do better than other parts of the state related to a variety of health outcomes. But even Austin only gets a C+ with a prematurity rate at 9.4. You can look at Harris County at 11.6. You can look at Hidalgo at 14. I've actually looked at some of the data when you delve down to the zip code level where those disparities are even greater. And as you note at the last column, you'll see that many of those areas are worse than last year. Again, we're not going in the right direction. And I think it may even get worse the next year because of all the things that have occurred with COVID. If we can go to the next slide. One of the things that the March of Dimes has been focusing on the last year are the things that we call the social determinants of health. Basically, they're measures of where we live, the access to healthcare, where we work, all those things that surround us to make it easier or harder for us to live a healthy life. So in this version of the report card, they've added 3 components related to social determinants of health. The first is the uninsured rate among women. And you see as a baseline what our Healthy People 2030 goal is, which would be just below 8. You see on the purple line, the United States average of 11.9. And then you see Texas at 24.7. This is one of those challenges that we have in Texas, that our uninsured rate is much higher than the rest of the nation. And we need to think creatively of how do we address that here in our state. The second social determinant of health is inadequate prenatal care. Again, you see the Healthy People 2030 goal at 19.5, the United States as a whole below that, but Texas is above that. Again, we need to do better at bringing women into the type of prenatal care they need, and so that they can have a healthy, happy baby. And then you look at poverty among women of reproductive age. And again, you see the Healthy People 2030 goal at 8, the United States average at 14.7, and the Texas average, which is about twice as high as the Healthy People 2030 goal. Again, we need to work in order to ensure that women of reproductive age have the resources they need, are insured, and get prenatal care if we want to address prematurity in our state. If we go to the next slide, one of the additional components to this card is a measure of 5 components that can help see if we have the infrastructure in place in order to ensure babies have again, that we're addressing prematurity and that we're addressing maternal morbidity and mortality. One of those areas obviously has to do with Medicaid expansion. We are one of those states that has not. We do have a maternal mortality review committee, and let me talk a little bit about that committee now. That's a really important legislative directive committee that looks at the deaths of moms and looks to see if they've been, what could have been preventable. And the sobering truth is that a lot of those births could have been prevented. That if the right things were put in place, that those moms didn't have to die. I was the commissioner when this was first put in place, and I was surprised when I first saw the data that it was things that I wouldn't necessarily have thought were the leading causes of death. Yes, hemorrhage is one of those, but things like cardiovascular disease, mental health, substance abuse, suicide, violence, those type of things are adversely affecting moms in this age. And again, leading causes of maternal mortality in our state. Medicaid extension, we got a check mark. What we have in the state of Texas is an actual extension of healthcare last legislative session. And I again say this is one of those components of advocacy of why it's so important is that we were able to, through Senate Bill 750, extend care to women following delivery. We have a perinatal quality improvement collaborative. I'm very involved in that as an executive sponsor of it. But the Texas Collaborative for Healthy Mothers and Babies is our perinatal quality improvement collaborative and works in hospitals across the state to improve perinatal care. And then we have the measure of the average preterm birth costs, and ours are below that estimated cost. If we can go to the next slide. So this component of the report card then will compare us to other states. And again, this pattern is very familiar to a lot of us, that the southern part of the United States has much higher prematurity rates. Texas is a little bit better than some of our southern neighbors, but we have a lot of work to do. And again, the United States as a whole only gets a C minus at 10.2%. Let's go to the next slide. So as I noted earlier, disparities is really an important issue as we try to improve health, the differences between different ethnic groups or geographic locations. One of the components, newer components to the report card is an actual measure of those disparities. For the United States as a whole, the disparity ratio is 1.26. We go to the next slide. We have the rate, I believe we have the rate for Texas. Actually, the rate for Texas was 1.02. So our disparity is a little bit less than other states, but still we have significant differences between ethnic groups, especially in African Americans here in our state. And then on the last slide, there you have then the disparities related to infant mortality. And again, we have our rates not where we want it to be, but those disparities aren't quite as large as they are in some other parts of the United States, with our infant mortality rate at 5.5 compared to the national average of 5.7. Up to the next slide. So just a couple of visual representations of where are we having the biggest challenges of prematurity. In this slide, we have the counties that have rates over 11.2 are in the darkest, and the next between 9.8 and 11.2, and then under 9.8 is in the lightest color. And again, you can see the challenges that we have in rural areas, but also in the Houston area and along the border and in East Texas. Another way to look at this is comparing it to the overall average. If we go to the next slide. This one shows the areas that are higher than the Texas average, that are between the March of Dimes 2020 goal and that Texas rate, and then are below the March of Dimes goal of 8.1. And again, there's very few counties in our state that are lower than that March of Dimes goal right now, and many areas that have significant challenges. So I think that's the end of the slides. Let me just make a couple of, I see my friend Patrick Ramsey had put a comment in. He's our Chief Medical Officer for the Texas Collaborative for Healthy Mothers and Babies, and is one of those champions here in the state. And so some of the things that are occurring that you may not know, the legislature has focused in on this issue for the last several legislative sessions. We have a perinatal advisory committee that meets on a regular basis that's supported by statute. I talked about the maternal morbidity and mortality task force that delves into that data of moms that have died and figuring out the causes. And then they've provided recommendations. And so in December, this month, they provided the legislature specific recommendations. And a lot of those have to do with adequacy of care and addressing the mental health issues of women and making sure they have quality health care in the state. We're also involved in the Texas Collaborative for Healthy Mothers and Babies. Heather is actually part of our advisory committee for the TCHMB. Every year we have a summit, and we have about 600 people across the state of Texas that come to work together to address perinatal care in the state of Texas. We have a variety of quality improvement collaboratives that are hospital-based. One of them is looking at the temperatures of babies when they get brought into the NICU. Are they at the right temperature? We've had work to address early warning signs so that physicians know when is a mom getting into trouble, so that they can call the right people and do the right things. We've had quality improvement collaboratives related to the use of maternal breast milk in ICU, so the moms are able to use their breast milk to nourish their babies. And a variety of those type of quality improvement collaboratives, partnering with what we call the Regional Advisory Councils of Trauma now, and their prenatal quality regions. We have about 200 hospitals that are part of those initiatives working together to drive quality improvement in hospitals across the state. One of the other initiatives, and this was legislative directed, is the Texas AIM. These are quality improvement bundles, a national initiative to drive quality improvement. Hospitals across the state, over 200 hospitals again, have been working on hemorrhage and identifying women when they're in trouble and making sure that they are ready to provide the life-saving support they need if of moms are having hemorrhage following their delivery. They're transitioning now to address hypertension. They'll also be addressing opioid use. And so a variety of quality improvement collaboratives that many of them are directed from the legislature through state agencies. But I'd also say the March of Dimes is there side by side with these initiatives. In our Texas Collaborative for Healthy Mothers and Babies annual conference, the March of Dimes is always a sponsor, is always there. Through a variety of these initiatives, the March of Dimes is, again, side by side with us, working at the local level in the NICUs, working at the state level, working at the advocacy level to drive that infrastructure we need to ensure moms and babies have the best shot of being healthy. I am now going to turn this virtual podium over to Janice Hale-Harris. The report card, I would say, and the data that I say just tell part of the story. You really don't get a picture of the impact of prematurity until you talk to people that have gone through it and lived through it and have that life experience. So we have invited Janice Hale-Harris to share her story with us today on why we really must do more here in the state of Texas. With that, Janice, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you. And Janice, I think you have your microphone on mute.
It would help if I turned my microphone on, wouldn't it? Thank you again so much for inviting me to come and share the story that has really not only impacted my family, but impacted a community of people here in Houston. And so Tamara Johnson Thompson grew up with my son and my daughter. So we've known her since she was 11 years old. And she was the epitome of what you would want from a daughter, from a friend, from a wife. She was going to make partner in her organization. She worked for a big accounting firm here in town. She was athletic. She was involved in the community. She had great health care, and yet she still died. And so we look at all of the things that happened, and it took 7 weeks after the delivery of the baby for Tamara to pass away. And we sat around thinking, what could we have done differently? What could have happened that would have made this a better situation, that this woman would live and have an opportunity to really raise her baby? She held her, I think, for just a couple of minutes right after she was born, and she never got to hold her baby again. And we look at all of the systemic issues and concerns and problems that happen particularly to women of color. And we see that a lot of those things happened in Tamara's case. For the family, we decided that we really needed to come together and continue to advocate so that we didn't have more Tamaras. So we put together a team called Today, Tomorrow, Forever. And this team raised over $15,000. These were friends from literally all over the country who came together to help us, not only raise money, but to bring a spotlight to why this is such a big issue. Imagine that her parents are now raising this 2.5-year-old. This happened in 2018. And in Tamara's group of friends, there were others who were pregnant at the same time, so excited they were going to all have their babies together. And now these women were traumatized by the thought of giving birth because they had watched everything that Tamara went through. I believe that one of the great things that has come out of this is really the Birth Equity Steering Committee. And while the committee had started, I was excited to have an opportunity to join, not just to advocate for Tamara, but also to advocate for other mothers who struggle. Either they lose their lives or they lose their babies in this process. And that because of the steering committee and the work that we're doing there, we really have the ability to raise money to make sure that we're having more research and that we can educate healthcare workers, we can educate families, we can educate moms, even on how to advocate for themselves when they find that perhaps their doctor's not listening or they need to explain things in a different way. We feel like it's so important for us to make sure that advocates are available, that moms know, and that we work with healthcare workers to really stop some of the unconscious bias and maybe systemic racism that occurs that gets in the way of us really being able to provide the best care for moms. Even little things like women of color tend to have bigger babies. It's not really true. And, or that hypertension or diabetes, well, you know, those run in the family. But typically when moms are pregnant, they need to know that these are things that need to be watched carefully. And while we don't know exactly what the issue was in Tamara's case, we know that similar things happen over and over again. And we even have a person who is on our birth equity committee, one of the doctors who had a similar issue happen while she was in the hospital. And even being a doctor, because they didn't know she was a doctor, they weren't listening to her. And so I'm excited that we have the Birth Equity Committee to continue to raise awareness around this issue. I'm excited to be able to represent Tamara, and I know from knowing her since she was 11 years old that she would absolutely want me, her friends, her family to advocate so that this didn't happen to others. And this forum gives us an opportunity to give voice to someone who's no longer here to plead for herself, but to also give voice to what her daughter will need as she gets older, and to all the other moms, babies, and families of color who are in need of the kind of support that the March of Dimes can provide directly to them and to healthcare workers to make sure that we're getting our message across. I just want to thank you for joining us and continuing in these efforts around the March of Dimes. And I'd like to introduce Shannon Lucas, because we need lots of volunteers throughout Texas to come together and to make big changes for mothers in Texas. And Shannon is the Advocacy and Government Affairs Committee member, and she's going to talk to us about how we can be improving birth outcomes for mothers and babies across Texas.
Thank you, Janice, for sharing your why and for sharing that important story of tomorrow. It's because of stories like hers that I volunteer for the Advocacy and Government Affairs Committee. And as Dr. Lakey said, March of Dimes has a unique history of tackling the problems from multiple ways to improve the health of mothers and babies, both today and tomorrow. When you support March of Dimes through things like your event sponsorship, annual giving, or raising funds, you're not only funding programs in education and research, you're also funding the work that we as March of Dimes do as a key player in federal and state advocacy efforts. March of Dimes has been focusing on maternal mortality in Texas for several years, but unfortunately we have heard far too many stories like Tamara's. By looking at policy and action from other states, we know that we could have lower maternal mortality. And we know that there are several things that we could be doing in Texas to improve our maternal health. March of Dimes and our state government Advocacy and Government Affairs Committee and all of our volunteers played a key role in the 2019 legislative session. March of Dimes worked with key stakeholder coalitions and provided verbal and written testimony and lobbied at the Capitol throughout the session, as well as at our volunteer lobby day to improve women's health. Most notably, we helped to pass Senate Bill 750 by Senator Kolkhorst that Dr. Lakey referenced earlier. This bill enabled the state to offer a more comprehensive, multi-pronged approach to address maternal mortality by enhancing prenatal and postpartum care services for women who are at high risk. And it also included creating a postpartum depression treatment network and changed the Texas Maternal Mortality and Morbidity Task Force into an official review committee. That committee, as Dr. Lakey referenced earlier, has recently released their biennial report. Unfortunately, the finding of this report shows that we still are not doing enough to improve maternal health in Texas. We know that there are multiple factors that impact maternal health. While we are making some progress at the individual family, provider, and facility level, we must also do more to protect mothers at the community and system levels. And that will require combined efforts across entities, levels, and systems. Maternal mortality is just one of the issues that we advocate for to the Texas lawmakers. And as we get ready for the 2021 legislative session, we need your help to ensure that our state officials are able to use the March of Dimes report card and know about the recommendations that Dr. Lakey discussed earlier. As you know, typically March of Dimes hosts a lobby day at the Capitol each session to ensure that the legislators will hear from their constituents on the issues that matter. But of course, with COVID-19, we know that an in-person event is just not going to be possible this year. But we know that the voice of moms and babies in Texas is more important now than ever before. So that's why we have launched a new grassroots volunteer campaign to help ensure that we can still be that voice. We're calling this the Advocacy Champions for Texas, or ACT campaign. And this is your chance to share your why and help the March of Dimes fight for the health of moms and babies. Our ACT campaign goal is to ensure that we have at least one volunteer for every state house district to ensure that every legislator can be contacted by a March of Dimes advocate from their own district. This means that we have a very lofty goal of 150 volunteers. We would ideally love to have even more than one representative per district. So if you know of somebody else who's not on this call today that might be a perfect fit for this, we would love for you to recruit them as well. Now, I know that some of you may be disappointed that we're not holding our traditional lobby day, but I want to tell you that as a former advocacy director for March of Dimes and as a former legislative staffer, I really believe that this model may actually wind up being better. Instead of just one time visiting with the legislative office for 15 minutes, our volunteers are going to have a chance to develop a meaningful working relationship with these legislative offices. And they will have the opportunity to contact these offices throughout the session, weighing in throughout the time during as key moments are popping up. They're going to be able to react and have lots of dialogue instead of just that one-time encounter. So you may be thinking, well, I don't know that I'm really the kind of person that could be an advocacy volunteer. I'm not a doctor or I'm not an advocacy expert, and that's okay, because guess what? You're on this call because you're passionate about the mission of March of Dimes. You're passionate about improving the health of mothers and babies, and those are exactly the kind of people that we need to be members of the ACT campaign. March of Dimes is going to provide you with everything that you need to know, and we just need you to be the voice for moms and babies and share with your representatives stories like tomorrow's. They know that these issues are important, and when they hear it from their constituents, that's what matters. Training and resources will be provided to you, and with our new virtual advocacy efforts, you will be able to participate in the campaign from wherever you are. There's no need to go anywhere if you don't want to. It can all be done virtually. This means you don't have to take off a day from work to come to lobby day. You can do it on your own time when you have time and it's convenient for you. So we hope that you will sign up to be an ACT member. You can actually click on the link in the chat now and go ahead and fill out the online form with all of your contact information. And then the March of Dimes staff will be in touch with you on training opportunities and the action items. They will be contacting you after the holidays in January once the session gets started. And the sign up link will also be sent out by email to all participants after this call. And then if you have any questions about the ACT campaign, please go ahead and type those in the chat, and the staff will be happy to answer those by email after this call is over. So now I would like to introduce my friends John and Mia McCord. John is a board member on the Austin Market Board and is the Texas Legislative Director for NFIB. He's also a mission dad, and he is joined by his wife Mia today. Mia is president of the Texas Conservative Coalition Research Institute and actually experienced premature birth and preeclampsia during the delivery of her son while she was chief of staff for Senator Hancock during a legislative session. They are here today to share their story and share how impactful volunteer engagement is during the legislative session.
Thanks, Shannon. Thank you everyone for joining this afternoon. I really appreciate y'all taking a little bit of the time out of your day to hear kind of an update on where we stand in Texas with March of Dimes. As Shannon mentioned, between Mia and I, we have over 30 years of experience in the Capitol. During that time, we've seen the importance and the role that March of Dimes plays during a legislative session with information and the stories that they bring to the numbers. But before we kind of dive into the impact that March of Dimes has during a session and for legislators, I want to let Mia talk a little bit about her experience with our firstborn, in the middle of, at the height of a legislative session. So.
Thanks, John. I was a chief of staff in the Texas Senate in 2013, and I was pregnant with our first child. We were very excited. We were only a little over a year into marriage, and the pregnancy had gone beautifully. I mean, aside from the sleepiness and the evening sickness, not morning sickness, everything was great. I was still wearing my high heels to the Capitol every day, and I was working my long hours, and John and I thought we had it all planned out. And the week before Easter, I was on the Senate floor and I looked down at my feet, and my feet had swollen over my shoes. Not having been pregnant before, I thought this was normal, but I called my doctor, and my doctor said, if you have any other symptoms, just call me back. We went about our business, traveled that weekend for Easter with our families, and on the way home from our visit, I became very ill. I had really horrible headaches, just did not feel well in general. Went into the doctor's office the very next morning, and I was put on bed rest with very little explanation as to what was going on. And so my type A personality went to the Capitol and got my laptop and told my staff that I was going to be available by phone and not to worry, I would be back in a week. So a week later, I went back in for my follow-up appointment. My doctor released me from bed rest, and I went to the Capitol straight from her office. I worked a full day, and that night my symptoms got really bad. I had at this point swollen to about 15, 20 pounds over my normal pregnancy weight. And I was having really horrible pains, not pregnancy pains, but quite literally organ pains. I was rushed to the hospital, then transported to another hospital, and about 40 hours later, our son was born. I was only 26 weeks pregnant at the time. John Mark had been measuring about a week small the entire pregnancy. And here I found myself a new mom, middle of a legislative session with a baby in the NICU that I couldn't see because my health was so bad. And my health was touch and go for a while. And so we had an amazing Capitol family. Senator Hancock was incredible. He made all sorts of accommodations for my family, and in fact, cut off my email because I was not going to work, even though I wanted to. But after 122 days, and we were able to bring our little 1 pound, 4 ounce baby boy home. And you can see in the pictures that are being displayed there, he is now, he's now a healthy 7-year-old, but our family really resonated with the Capitol family. I don't think John Mark quite understands how much of an impact his birth had on the way the Capitol viewed prematurity and talked about prematurity. And so it's kind of been a mission of ours to tell his story and to continue to share what happened to us. And, as was said earlier, it can happen to anyone. I had great health care. I was in great health, or so I thought. You don't know. And there are some cute pictures there of him last session with Senator Hancock and Lieutenant Governor and Representative Leach. But what you're doing is so important. And with that, John, I think is going to go over a few ways, just some helpful hints in talking to your legislators.
Yeah, so obviously we've been in the Capitol through session, and we've had these meetings with March of Dimes advocates before as a staffer. So we understand that side of it, but we also understand where March of Dimes is coming from, because this is very personal to us, which is why Mia and I are happy to take any time that we can to make the volunteers for March of Dimes feel comfortable and feel prepared as they go into those meetings for the next session. Now, one of the things that I want to emphasize is that you can have all of the data and you can have all of the numbers, and all of that is great. But the most important thing that you can do as an advocate for March of Dimes is go into a meeting with a legislator or a legislative staff member with a story and build that relationship through a story, because there is nothing that is going to be more persuasive or get the attention and hold the attention of a legislator and a legislative staff member long than your personal story. Literally as a staffer, you sit there in the Capitol for 8, 10, 12 hours a day, and you kind of have meeting after meeting after meeting. They last 15, 20 minutes, and people just cycle through all day long. It's just kind of the life that you live for about 5 months, and it's great. And people bring in all kinds of numbers to advocate for all kinds of different policy changes. But I can still tell you, I can pick out specific meetings that I had 5, 6, 7 years ago in the Capitol, specifically because of the story that constituent of my boss brought into that office and what they were trying to accomplish through that. So regardless of the numbers that you're going to bring in that March of Dimes will provide, regardless of how comfortable you feel, whether you've ever done this before or not, the most important thing you can do is be passionate about the cause that March of Dimes supports, the cause of March of Dimes, and really have that personal story that you can connect with that staffer for. Once you have that connection, once you have that relationship with the office, March of Dimes will provide the information. They'll provide the numbers. They'll provide the avenues that legislators can take to improve the situation in the state, to improve that scorecard. But really, it's the messenger in this case that is equally as, if not more important than the message itself. So besides taking those data points at the beginning of session, the March of Dimes will provide and kind of prepare you for those meetings. The other side of it is just simply be prepared for action alerts that March of Dimes will send out throughout session. If you're not familiar, a legislative session will last about 5 months. It's 140 days every other year. And so these legislators cram the business of the state into 140 days out of every 2 years. It is very fast paced and things can change very quickly. So during a legislative session, organizations such as March of Dimes are monitoring legislation, and as that changes, they need to activate volunteers quickly, either to support an issue or to oppose something that has changed. So if you will be prepared to just click a button and say, hey, legislator that I've already talked to, that I have this relationship with, this is happening right now. We need your help to make sure that it continues the way it's going, or we need to change something in this. It's something that's not difficult. It's either a phone call or a quick email to that staffer that you've already been visiting with. But it's just those 3 simple things that you can do over the course of 5 to 6 months that really have more of an impact than anything else that you can possibly do. And I think that Mia has a really great story when she first started out in the Capitol of kind of the way her boss viewed constituent calls.
My very first job in the Capitol, I had a wonderful boss out of Dallas, and she required that we note every single constituent who called her office on an issue. And not only did we note what the constituent called about, but we were required to file that constituent's issue support against whatever they called about with a bill that corresponded with that issue. And so in the mornings when we would prepare her to go to the floor, she would have red, green, and yellow tags that indicated support, opposition, someone who was somewhat neutral on the bill. And she would go through and review each and every constituent's comments who had called into her office. So if you feel like maybe they're not listening, or that it doesn't matter, or that you're calling and you just don't feel like it's going to make a huge impact, it does. These legislative members want to hear from you. They want to hear from their constituents. And like John said, when they can sense your passion and you can build that relationship with them, that is going to go just so far and really help the March of Dimes in getting their action out, getting what they're trying to do, helping them be successful.
Absolutely. And I want to reiterate that as we move through session, there will never be a time that we're going to ask you all to make a phone call or an email or do anything that March of Dimes is not going to fully prepare you for first. We're going to make sure that we equip you with the tools that you need to be successful as you go into those conversations and into those meetings. You know, as we start to wrap up, I just want to take a second and thank everyone again for taking the time out of your afternoon. This is so important as we go into a legislative session, because we only get this shot once every couple of years. And with the restrictions around the Capitol this year, it's going to be more important now than ever to have those activists and activism statewide to make sure that we're able to reach all 150 members of the House and all 31 members of the Senate on a regular and on a quick basis. So now I'd like to turn the microphone over to Kara up in the DFW area to close us out for the day.
You bet. Thank you very much, John. And thank you to you and Mia for sharing your story. I appreciate hearing it. It's a great story. So on behalf of all the staff and volunteer leaders on this call, and as a mission mom myself, I would say that we can't thank you enough for all that you do and how much we appreciate that you stuck with us in 2020. Although, you know, we know the impact of COVID-19 has been horrible, there has been a silver lining in the virtual impact. So when the pandemic hit and we weren't able to come together as a state, we were able to come together as a state and start to share resources and ideas across markets. We opened new doors and we created new opportunities because the situation sort of forced us to do that. And that enabled us to provide resources to moms and families via the state organization in a more cohesive manner. We were able to offer things like Maternal Mental Health Day event, and it starts with mom, and share that across various cities. We were able to share it statewide. We were able to offer Run for Babies and Breakfast with the Champion to participants across the state. And we were able to cheer each other on in our various cities a little bit more than normal. So virtual has allowed us, this virtual world has allowed us to connect more and more and ensure more collaborative group success as various March of Dimes organizations across Texas. We can't leave today without thanking all of the healthcare workers and all of the public health leaders on this call and across the state, even those who didn't make it to the call today, for your support of all of your fellow Texans throughout this pandemic. We know this is an exciting and historic week with the rollout of the vaccination for healthcare workers. We are so grateful. This actually makes me a little emotional for the bravery of all of you healthcare workers, as you have put your lives on the line for the rest of us who don't have anything to do with healthcare. So thank you. That's a personal thank you. We also want to thank for all of the healthcare workers who've strategized for this rollout and to make the vaccination happen. We hope you continue to collaborate with March of Dimes in 2021. You are all champions for moms and babies and for March of Dimes. And as an organization and as a mom, I would say we are grateful for your support. However you choose to support March of Dimes, whether it's March of Babies, Starts with Mom, Signature Chef, Supportive Pregnancy Care, Run for Babies, annual giving, all the things that you guys do in addition to your healthcare work. Thank you. So I think we've got a slide that needs to go up with some various contact information. I do not have control of that, so hopefully somebody will put that up. And it's going to have contact information for reaching out to folks if you have any suggestions on how we can expand partnerships, make new connections, or offer different types of partnership in your community or across the state. If there's any ideas that you have, please contact these various local executive directors in our sort of 4 geographic quadrants of Texas. And we're excited about 2021 and what it holds, and we cannot wait to see you all next year. So I think with that, I think I'm the closer. So thank you to everybody for being involved today, and have a good afternoon.